I'm going to show you a really neat fabric technique. This is called a batik. Batik comes from Indonesia and it is a traditional way of creating a cloth. So what they normally use is a wax and a tool called a canting tool. Now we don't have wax or a canting tool at school, so we are going to use washable glue. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a resist. So when they do it, they use wax and then they dip it in dye, and the dye does not stick to the wax. We're going to do something very similar. However, we're going to do it with white glue. So what I have right now is I have a piece of fabric and it is on top of a piece of aluminum foil, and the aluminum foil is attached to a drawing board. The reason it is attached to a drawing board is to make it so that it doesn't wiggle and doesn't stick, because we're putting glue on here, so the glue will stick to go through the fabric and it will stick if you put it on top of cardboard. So the aluminum foil makes it so it doesn't stick, and keeping it on top of a drawing board makes it so it doesn't move on us. And then I just used a little bit of tape to hold the aluminum foil and the fabric in place. So what I did is I took pencil and I drew on top of my fabric. You don't have to do that way. You could draw it on a piece of paper first, outline it with Sharpie, and put it underneath your fabric. And you should be able to see it. And then you can go over it with the glue. The problem with that is then the fabric's going to be stuck to that piece of paper in the end. So that is one option. So what I did is I'm now taking my glue bottle. It's barely open because I don't want to get a big glob. And I am putting the white glue on top of the line. The trick is to make it so you have a thin line and so it's not big bubbles. And then what's going to happen is I'm going to let this glue dry overnight. So you can't do this all in one art class. I'm going to let it dry overnight. Now we don't have dye in our classroom either, so we're going to use watered down acrylic paint. And what we're going to do is we're going to paint it with acrylic paint once it dries. And then we're going to take it and we're going to put this whole thing into a bucket of water, and we're going to use a toothbrush and we're going to scrub off all the glue. And what's going to happen is wherever there was glue, it should still be white underneath of it and the paint will not stick to it. So I will show you part 2 once this dries, but for right now, this is part 1. You draw your design on a piece of fabric, you outline it with the glue, and then we'll come back and we'll paint it once it dries. And this is a really cool way to decorate fabric. Enjoy! Now that my glue has dried, I am ready for my next part of my batik. Now I'm still going to leave it on this aluminum foil. It doesn't necessarily have to be taped down, but the tape does keep it from wiggling, so I'm just leaving it as is. You want to use acrylic paint for this project. Acrylic paint is more of a permanent paint, so if you get it on your clothes, it will stain. Acrylic paint by itself, it's too thick, so you want to keep your brush on the wet side to make the acrylic paint kind of go into the fabric. The glue is now dry and it acts kind of like a little bit of barrier, but you do want to stay inside your lines. So as you paint, take your time, paint it neatly. Keep your brush a little bit wet so it's not too thick, and kind of have fun with it. You do want to make sure that you paint it all the way in. You don't want any plain fabric showing, which also means you don't want to use white paint either, because it's not going to show the resist part of it. You can water it down more to make it lighter if you want, more see-through, but you can mix white paint with it to make it a lighter shade. And you'll notice right away that my paint is not sticking on top of my glue lines, which is good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through. Every time I go use a new color, I wash my brush off, give it a little dry just to make sure you get all that paint off. But keep it wet and go through, paint your project, and then I will show you I'll show it to you when I'm done painting it, and then I'll show you the last step, which is when it is all the way dry. Okay, And just like that, I finished painting. That was easy. A couple things though, make sure your paint is thin. You do not want chunky paint on your paper. In fact, adding water to it makes it easier to paint on the fabric. You do want to remove your tape as close to the end as you can and make sure you get all those edges filled in. If for some reason the tape is blocking part of it, you're just going to have a white square wherever that tape was. So you do want to pull it off. And this is a 3-class minimum project because the first class you drew it and you did your glue. The glue might take you a second class. And then the next class after the glue is fully dry, then you're going to paint it. You can't do the next step though until the paint now is fully dry. And what I will do is I will take this when it's fully dry, I'm going to put it in a bath of water and just let it sit for a little bit. And then I'm going to use a toothbrush or my finger and I'm going to scrub all those glue lines off of it. And I'll show you what that looks like when we come back. But this is the second part of making a batik. For the last part of our batik, we're going to add a hanger to it. So now before we get to that part, let me just recap. We made glue lines on here. Then we painted it with watered down acrylic. After it all dried, I gave it a bath in my sink or in a tub of water and I scrubbed it away so you get all these nice white lines showing. If it still feels slimy, which I hate using that word, but that's the word it feels like, while you are rinsing it, that means there's still probably glue on there. So, and then it's dry now. So I'm going to add a stick into my piece. So what I did is I went outside and I found a nice little stick that's bigger than my artwork. I tried to cut off all the little nubs on here as best as I could. This is still a little bit long, so I'm just going to break it some more. You could also use a dowel rod, but I like things found in nature more to use. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to very carefully take my fabric and I'm going to fold it near the top. And I'm going to put a tiny, tiny little snip on this side. Just a little snip. And I'm going to put one on this side. You don't want it to be too close to the edges this way, and you don't want it to be too close to this part here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take my stick and I'm going to put it through my little nubs that I just made. And hopefully I cut all my pieces of my stick small enough that they will fit. And it's going to come out this side. Do a little wiggling, and then I can take a piece of yarn and I can hang it on this side, and now I can hang. You could also try your hand at sewing and maybe stitch the edges down if you'd want. Or, I mean, you could try hot glue too, but the easiest way is with the stick and you just cut through it and you attach it that way so that you have a hanger for your batik. All right, and that is batiks.